I'm Matt Harvey, the CEO of Stepping Forward Technology, and we've created another video to help business leaders navigate the world of technology. Today, we have Melanie Clay from Higginbotham to discuss what cyber liability insurance can do for your business. I consider Melanie Clay an expert on cyber liability insurance. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So Melanie, why is cyber liability insurance so important? And for people that have general liability insurance that have some cyber liability verbiage in there, are they covered correctly with their general liability insurance?
Yeah, so great question. So a lot of it is going to be based on your agent who's going to be able to interpret what they're selling you, essentially. It's just because you have the word liability in your policy doesn't necessarily mean that you're covered for all the different types of liability that we know about.
Sure.
So when we're looking specifically at CGL, commercial general liability, what I have been noticing is that there are some data exclusions. So specifically any sort of data event, cyber loss, anything like that is specifically excluded because then it's covered somewhere else. And we also have a certain type of business owner's policy called the BOP, and some of those are actually going to have some sort of a cyber sublimit. Usually not very much though. So what I've been seeing is anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 for maybe just the third party, which is the other person that might be involved in a loss, your customers, your clients, anybody who has had their data compromised. So in that instance, I guess something is better than nothing. But when we're looking at the limits and what we know about actual cost of a cyber breach, it's just simply not enough. And then we have the actual cyber liability policy. And so this is going to cover much more than just the third party, what a business might be responsible for if their customers' credit card information was stolen, birth dates were stolen, if they had any sort of adverse effects because of this, stolen money, stolen identity, anything like that. And then another thing to always be mindful of is that as a business owner, if you've had more than 500 of your clients' information breached, you have to notify the Attorney General. So that's just a law.
That does not sound fun.
No, it doesn't
Nobody
sound like
wants
fun.
to be there.
Right.
End up on the wall of shame.
Exactly, right? And that goes back into another great aspect too, is your reputation. Once you have a cyber event, if anything has happened, you could lose the trust of your clients. You could actually lose business for that just because they don't want to deal with somebody who's been all over the news or all over Facebook as somebody who's not exercising what we call cyber hygiene. And cyber hygiene is kind of a cool term, but it just basically means, are you doing what you can to change your passwords, educate your employees? What are you doing to actually mitigate or prevent cyber loss from happening?
Yeah, so you mentioned third-party risk, and I just want to make sure that people understand what is the third party. You mentioned like if a client gets compromised, were you referring to third party being if somebody was negligent and one of their key clients gets compromised because of their negligence, what liability they might have?
Correct.
Because you don't know if their clients, their vendors, if they have insurance to cover that.
Right.
And if they don't, where are they going to look?
Right. Well, if there is a lawsuit or any sort of allegation, everybody's getting pulled in. So hopefully everybody has coverage.
Well,
it's really going to be up for the judge to decide who actually is liable.
Okay.
But then there are other aspects as well, as far as third party, of course, being your clients or anybody else that is not necessarily directly associated with you. Second party is going to be the insurance company, and then first party is going to be you as the business owner, the policy holder.
That's perfect.
Yes.
Great. I think it'd be good to talk about what coverages a cyber liability insurance policy typically has, that you won't typically find in any kind of general liability policy. So you mentioned a cyber liability policy is going to have much larger total amounts that are covered, as well as, I think you call it data exclusions. Was that the term you used?
Yes. So that's from the
it's
liability.
probably not going to have the same data exclusions that you'll see.
Right.
So I
Not
feel
at
like
all.
the general liability policy might give you a false sense of comfort, but when you actually make that phone call, when you actually need help, it's not going to be there.
Yeah.
So if all that's accurate, so I guess what the cyber liability policy is going to provide is legal counsel. So in the midst of a cyber incident, you're going to have legal counsel. So you even know what to say and what to tell your clients. I've heard lots of times that a lot of the damage happens post compromise or the breach, and it has to do with how the incident's response handled it.
Correct.
There's been companies that have been compromised, and the first thing they do is they shut off their server and restore all their backups, and by doing so destroyed all of the evidence. It's
Right.
a federal offense. And they just made the problem infinitely more difficult.
Worse,
It's going to
yeah.
drag out to years in
Right.
the ramifications of that decision. So that'd be an example of why legal counsel, or even the things you tell your clients. We've been told that you always say there's been a cyber incident. You never use the word breach or
Right.
compromise because you don't know until forensics is done. You don't know.
Yeah.
And that brings me to the second one. Forensics,
Right.
like they're going to bring in their team of trusted experts to do the research.
Yes.
And without forensics, you're not going to know the scope of the damage.
Right.
And the good news is many times in a breach, it's less than you think. But without forensics, you'll never know that.
Right.
And then the third part would be the financial coverage. And I think this is where it'd be really good to talk about. And I'm sure this is specific to the company. So that it'd really be good to have an advisor like you to work with to get an idea of how much insurance is enough.
Yes.
Would it be safe to say anything less than $1 million is for any
not.
business
Yeah.
is not
It's
going to
probably
get you
not
there?
going to get you there.
Yeah. Okay. So that's
Unfortunately, we're in a world now where $1 million might as well, just be the bare minimum at this point, I think.
Yeah. What would you add to that in terms of the financial component of cyber liability insurance and how it can help?
Going back to what we were talking about, what's provided in the policy is the incident response program or the training.
That's right.
That's
You get
right.
an IR team, an incident
Right.
response team.
Yes.
And you don't want your IT company, and I am an IT company, responsible at the very top
Right.
if you've got a major incident, because from externally it looks like you're the fox is guarding the hen house.
Right.
Like they want to look good to you, and it's going to be a lot harder to get a realistic picture of what's happening. So when
Right.
you have an incidents response team
Yes.
that's doing the communication and correlating all of that, I'm really glad you mentioned that.
No, that's great. And then also employee training. So really what can we do? Because let's just be honest. I mean, insurance companies really don't want to pay losses because that's a loss for everybody. And the
Right.
more losses that an insurance company has to pay,
Just
the more
drives up the
premium.
rates,
Exactly.
yep.
And it's just a vicious cycle. So what can we do to prevent the loss from even happening? Well, one good step would be to have a IT team that knows what they're doing and can advise you that way. But what I'm finding also with a lot of the companies that I work with is that they actually provide training. So think of it like you're in a building and you have to run fire drills. Everybody gets annoyed because you have to put on your coat, go outside in the cold and stand there for 5 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
But should there actually be a fire, you've done it enough, you have enough repetition, you know what to do in the event of an emergency. So same thing with cyber, you get a weird email, what's our procedure? What do we do when we get an email from our boss that sounds kind of like him, but it isn't quite right? Do we know how to look for what email this actually came from? What links are in our emails? I mean, there's a lot of things that we could do to prevent this from even happening.
And here's what we've noticed. The days of getting the email saying a Nigerian prince is
Right.
some
We're
great
onto that one.
ancestor and you're going to be inherit all this money.
Right.
That one, that you don't see those anymore. But the
Correct.
sophistication of these phishing emails have gotten really hard for a human to tell the difference.
Yes.
So in our world, we use email threat detection as a way to analyze those emails using sometimes AI technology to really track down where those links go and is this legit? Did this email, it came from Microsoft, it says it did, but did it come from a Microsoft server?
Right.
If not, I'm going to either block it if I know it's phishing, or I'm going to put a big banner on the top and warn you, hey,
Right.
look out before you click any,
Yep.
this may not be legit, you
Right.
know? So, email threat protection can be really helpful in that scenario because you can't always count on users knowing
Right.
the difference.
Right. And then we get into spear phishing. We get into the more targeted attacks. So one of it could be, well, on your LinkedIn, you mentioned one of your vendors, XYZ company, right? And all of a sudden, your harassed, tired accounts payable person who's trying to get out of the office for the end of her day gets urgent, late bill. You have to pay this now. Your policy or whatever is going to be canceled if you don't. And she's like, okay, fine, just pay it. Well, it was a fake invoice. It really didn't exist. Somebody had, copied and pasted the logo or whatever. And now what a company is going to look at, an insurance company is going to look at, is the term voluntary parting. Did you give it up voluntarily? Or were you coerced? So what we're looking at with our cyber insurance is called the deception coverage. So if you have deception coverage and you were deceived into giving away something that you thought was legitimate, there could be coverage for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's big, because I think that's becoming one of the most
Yeah.
common forms of
Yeah.
any kind of cyber is really deceiving the end user.
Yep.
And they're getting good at it.
And they're getting really good at it.
Especially, you mentioned spear phishing. So
Yes.
spear phishing is when you have an email that is literally crafted and targeted for one person. Like phishing in general is like you throw a big net,
Right.
right? You're trying to just, maybe 1% of them respond, and
Yeah.
that's great.
Right.
Those are great odds. But spear phishing is generally higher costs associated. And it's really normally between, the CFO and the president or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's really neat to know that deception coverage is a thing. So.
And you want to make sure that you have an agent that knows about that so that they can add it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So if somebody like me, I have a policy that I've had for a long time. Do we need to review it? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
Actually, find out if some of these new coverages are in there.
Yeah. Yeah, just see what's in there and what's not in there. Any what we call gaps in coverage, like areas where you're kind of like flying without a safety net,
Here's what happens. People have a policy. They've had it a long time, like I have. And every renewal, they go, it's more expensive.
Yeah.
But okay, sure.
Yeah.
And they just sign on and let's continue the coverage forward.
Yes.
Maybe if the business is growing, they're adding to their premiums, but most of the time those policies aren't changing year over year.
Right.
What would you recommend? Is that the time that they should be really reviewing those
I think
coverages?
So what I try to do for my clients is 30 to 60 days before the renewal is to go over that. Having a claim is not the time to find out that you didn't have the coverage or that your agent didn't want to go over a renewal or ask the hard questions or offer a coverage, whether you wanted it or not, or as a business owner, you didn't want to pay for it. What I am finding is that I would like to see more business owners consider insurance a cost of doing business, to have it as a line item. One thing I'm seeing is maybe even 2 to 6% of your total revenue should be allocated towards insurance.
Just general, not just cyber liability,
All of it.
but all of it?
All of it. Your workers' comp,
You said
your property.
2 to 6%? Wow.
Yeah. Especially now in Colorado, rates are increasing. And
Okay.
yeah. So that leads us to also is that some insurance carriers are getting savvy to the ransomware. Some insurance companies won't pay ransomware anymore because the hackers or the bad actors or whatever have gotten so good at it that they've literally kind of drained the money bucket that the paying out claims. Some companies are going to reimbursement. One of the companies I work with called Cowbell Cyber, they will have an option. So they will either pay and accept reimbursement from the client, or depending on the amount, they'll just pay it. It'll be part of the sublimit in your contract.
I got a question related to that. If a company has been compromised, especially financially, it's not uncommon that their bank accounts get frozen. And then all of a sudden, but payroll was on Friday and, credit card hasn't been paid yet.
Yeah.
And now maybe I have to pay ransomware.
Yeah.
Like, where does that money actually come from?
Right.
And so I've been advised that it's really prudent to keep the bulk of your money in your business account where it can get transferred out. So we had a example where like an email account, this was several years ago, got compromised and they were trying to transfer, and it wasn't even a large amount. It was $35,000, but they didn't keep that much in that account.
Right.
And so the person did the wire failed. She went to the president and said, "Hey, I'm trying to get this paid. You told me to pay it." And he's like, no, I didn't. That's not a good moment with your boss. But she was saved because that account was always kept at a smaller amount for wire transfers. I've also talked to companies that work at the bank to build a blacklist so that you can't do any wire transfers except for a few approved vendors.
Yeah.
So some banks have that capability, and that would be another way that you could prevent an accidental wire transfer from happening to some third party that you have no idea who they are.
Correct. Or having even like a checks and balances service, like you can't do anything without 2 signatures, or, not being afraid to ask whoever sent you the email, hey, did this come from you? Yeah. Typically what we're finding is that they'll send these emails while this person is in a meeting, or if he has a reputation of being kind of a boss like that, people are like, oh, well, I don't want to make him mad. And, so true story, pre-COVID, I was at a kind of like a seminar or whatever, and they were talking about how even in 2019, one of their receptionists unfortunately fell for the scratch the gift cards. So the way that they did it, the social engineering, is that they sent her an email. Don't tell anybody. This is just between you and me. So I want to do something really special for the Christmas party this year. So what I need you to do is go to Walmart and spend $10,000 on gift cards, come back, scratch off all the numbers, put
Take
it in
pictures.
and she did it. And yeah, that actually did happen. So what they did is they appealed to her sense of wanting to be in on something, to be special, to do something that was nice for everybody on a surprise, you know. And so it's kind of sad, but again, that's where the employee training and, you know, kind of like the Nigerian prince, we laugh about it, but people are still falling for the old scratching the
Well, you're
gift
touching on
cards.
something that you actually touched on two things that I think are worth just reemphasizing. One is policy can go a long way. Like security is process, people, and technology. It's all three coming together. And when you have a process so that, you know, if there's ever a wire transfer change, it happens with a voice.
Yes.
I think what has shifted in our industry is pre-COVID, we were focused on prevention. And post-COVID, especially with everyone moving and working from home and all the different cyber stuff that happened that funded the next decade of cybercrime, now we have to take a different approach to security, which is an assumed breach. We just take the assumption that my company, your company, all of our companies will get breached at some level at some time.
Right.
The question is, how fast are you going to know?
Right.
And how much damage is going to happen? Because if you know really quickly and you can respond, you've got incident response, you can prevent all the damage, actually.
As much as you can.
I'm a big fan of SOC, a Security Operations Center. And a lot of those resolve those situations within 20 minutes. Well, you can't even design your... our lateral movement doesn't happen on average that fast. So like they don't even get their feet wet.
Right.
They don't get to plan their attack. They just got in. They're like, great, what's here? What can we do? Right. Oh, I just got shut out. So, and it's actually pretty easy to detect because when you're on the outside of a network, you got to find any crack to get in. Yeah. So the odds are as a hacker are in your favor.
Right.
But once you get in a network, all of a sudden, any wrong step that triggers an alarm because you've got the right monitoring in place, the tables turn.
Right.
And the alarms go off.
Yes.
So having the right solutions in place, like a good EDR, endpoint detection response system, that's like your monitor.
Right.
And a SOC that monitors the monitor to respond. So this is where you get into the other side of a breach, post-breach, detecting and responding. You don't have to have a big, costly event. Right. That's not necessary.
Well, along those lines, too, as a business owner, you don't have to have this level of information. You don't have to know what you're doing because you have the IT guy that speaks these acronyms and understands the processes. You have the insurance agent that understands the coverage of what's being afforded should anything happen. So then that really does free you up to run your business. Yeah. Because the guy that flips pizzas and just, all he cares about is where he's getting his produce. He doesn't want to monitor every time a customer swipes a credit card, what may potentially happen down the road. That's for us to decide. Yep. And so that kind of creates a really unique community, I think, is when you have your team in place. Trust is a big issue. You've got to be able to trust people because we do have to ask a lot of questions. How are you staying healthy? How are you doing your cyber hygiene? How are you training your employees? Are you changing your password? That, to me is like one of the biggest, easiest ways to kind of go down that path of eliminating the risk from even happening. So in one of the seminars that I had gone to, how they likened it was it's like anybody trying to break into a house. Well, if the front door is wide open, that's tempting. But if you have a barking dog in the front lawn, that's going to deter it. And so really when these hackers are trying to hit these systems and they do notice, if I pursue this too much, like what you were talking about, if I pursue this too much further, it's going to start triggering off alarms and stuff like that. So that's not low-hanging fruit. That's going to be kind of difficult for me to go into. So it's just something to think about.
I think that's very, very legit to be considering that because it reminds me of this saying, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun
the other guy.
The other guy. And when they start, they're working on getting in an account, they steal or passwords on the dark web, right? And they're trying to get in one of your accounts and then they get a little farther and they go, oh, there's MFA. If they have MFA, they probably have backups. They might even have a SOC. The SOC might be calling them right now and blocking my IP. I'm going to work on this company over here. You know, it's like, so sometimes just some of these, more public things that show that you're doing things.
Yeah.
And I just think it's, like you said, really important to have a technology advisor that you trust.
Yes.
Especially in IT, because you're going to give them the keys to the kingdom and then hopefully trust them to protect your data.
Right.
And the reality is we can't protect everything. There's too much happening, which goes back to the assumed breach. But man, we can make a big impact and reduce the damages that can happen.
Yeah.
But that's why I still think cyber liability insurance needs to be there.
It comes in and it kind of goes behind the IT. It goes behind the cyber insurance or cyber hygiene. So you've done all these things to prevent it. You've got all these systems in place. Again, I could get into a car. I could put on my seatbelt. I could check my mirror. I can make sure that I'm using my turn signal. I can do all the right things. But when that guy runs the red light and I still end up in an auto accident, I'm going to kind of wish I had insurance.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, because like we mentioned, your CPA could be the one that's compromised or another vendor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
All right, Melanie, I think it'd be helpful if we talk a little bit about what's required to get in policy and to stay compliant with that policy.
Okay.
I'm going to throw a few things out there and have you add to it.
Absolutely.
But from what I have observed when I review policies with our clients is they look a lot at endpoint protection, and that starts with antivirus, which I kind of describe that as the security guard at the front door watching who's coming in and out of the building.
Right.
It doesn't help you with the back door.
Right.
So EDR is endpoint detection response, and that's like a surveillance system that is constantly monitoring the activity inside the organization, mostly looking for malicious activity. So, maybe the guy doesn't look like a robber, but he's breaking a window.
Right.
That's odd. And an example in the world we live in is like many times software is misused. So they don't use any malicious code at all. They just misuse the software that already exists.
Right.
An example of that is if they can compromise your backup solution, they can use it to exfiltrate all of your data. It's beautiful.
Right.
They love it. So keeping your backup solution up to date, really important.
Right.
And then a SOC is like having the police show up. Like the SOC we use responds within 5 minutes of any critical instance.
Yeah.
So that's like, they're going to go in there, they're going to isolate the machine, they're going to stop, and they're going to, the event, and they're going to call us.
Right.
So they can lock it down.
Yeah.
And stop it. So I like to call that the trinity of endpoint protection.
Right.
Now, you don't necessarily have to have a SOC on all policies from what I've noticed, but I bet that's coming in the future. The requirements tend to change. So.
Probably as the world changes, as the risk increases, and as the insurance company has to pay out more claims, they're going to get kind of savvy as to what they're going to be more willing to accept in the front end before there's a loss versus, oh, wow, we've had all these claims where this one element wasn't in place. Well, now that we put this in place, it's going to really minimize the chance of having a claim, right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
Another one would probably be vulnerability management.
Yeah.
So that definitely affects endpoints, probably even your cloud environment. But many times a hacker, before they even decide what they're going to try to do to compromise your company, is they're going to do a vulnerability scan and find out, well, where should we start?
Right.
What's not patched? I used to call it the NVC, the most vulnerable computer. Where is that?
Right.
We want to start there.
Probably the CEO, because he doesn't want to change his password or deal with all those annoying little, downloads.
Yeah, potentially. Starting with a vulnerability scan is a really good place if you want to be more secure. Let's start where they start. It's a red team, blue team kind of thing.
Right.
And then let's mitigate those things, proactively. So vulnerability management, employees, that's got to be one of the biggest, it is probably the biggest risk.
Yeah.
So making sure that the employees are properly trained, that's definitely on the policies. Multi-factor authentication, that is one of the most important, right? So most policies that I see is they want multi-factor authentication, which is something like a password, and something you have, like a cell phone.
Right.
Both of those have to exist to be able to log in.
Yeah.
And one of the things we're noticing is if an email account is compromised, it's almost standard procedure that your social media accounts are compromised too.
Yep.
And the reason for that is if somebody gets into your email, they can do a password reset and get into your other accounts as well. So it's the keys to the kingdom. And that is the number one targeted thing in cybercrime is email.
Yeah.
So they want to see MFA on email. They want to see MFA on any remote access, and they want to see MFA on any privileged accounts, administrative accounts. I guess the last one would be, I call it email threat protection, but it's having a system that analyzes those emails like we talked about earlier and determines if it's a phishing email or not, because they're just getting too difficult to tell and your users are probably not going to know.
Right.
Is there anything you would add to that in the list of your experience of what you've seen, or if people are doing at least those things, do you think they would qualify?
Definitely. Yeah. So as we're going through the insurance application, these are all the questions. So the application started off at one point in time, probably 3 or 4 years ago, with maybe 6 or 7 questions. And now it's about 2 to 3 pages.
Yeah.
And so it is getting very detailed. It is definitely administratively kind of burdensome for some of our small business owners. I think what I also run into a lot more too is, well, how do I get this? How would I even do an MFA, or how would I even do the endpoint, protection, anything like that? Like, I don't even know where to start with this. Yep. So it's very intimidating, and some people just, what do we talk about? They'll avoid it. They'll accept it. They'll reject it. As I'm going through this with my clients, I am finding that a lot of the insurance companies I work with provide these services. And the vulnerability checkpoint, I've had a couple of companies that will run that check before they even present the quote.
Right.
So that when they present the quote, they will display, okay, here's your areas of opportunity. What can we do to kind of make this a little bit less likely that there's going to be a loss, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. What happens if they answer yes to all those questions and 6 months down the road, it's no longer true?
Correct. Yeah.
What happens if there's an event in that situation, some kind of cyber?
Yeah. So what it does is it does give the insurance company the opportunity to deny a claim. Most companies would probably pay the claim, but then instantly non-renew you, because now you're let's consider insurance. It's a contract. It's an agreement between the insurance company and the insured. Quite literally, you breached the contract. You didn't do what you said you were going to do, and something bad happened. So, the insurance company may definitely probably reject any sort of first party, your coverages, your loss of data, your destroyed computers or whatever, but they may still pay any sort of third party claims against your customers, your clients, anything like that.
Interesting.
Just because it could come back on them as well.
So they care about their reputation. So
of course.
They might pay maybe part of the claim. Yeah. Like they might work on some level.
Right.
But you're certainly not going to get the coverage you thought you were paying for.
They will more than likely issue a non-renewal letter.
Well, and it makes sense because essentially you lied and trust is broken, and they don't want those kinds of clients.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm finding that certain industries are becoming uninsurable. Just the industry.
Yeah.
They're like, you're such a high target.
Yeah.
Ours is an example of that. They're like, when a company like us gets compromised, it can affect a lot of companies in a very deep, big way. And so that's your reputation with these companies is something you have to maintain.
Right.
So, and what is a good way to stay compliant with your insurance? You talked about doing annual reviews. It's probably a good time to do an audit and be like, is endpoint protection on every endpoint?
Right.
Because if we missed one, that's reason that they may not pay out a claim.
Well, it's an entry. It's a port of entry, we can call it. So if you have 6 employees and they all have laptops and they're all in compliance or whatnot, and you decide to go ahead and hire 2 more, and you've issued 2 more laptops, but you were in a hurry and you didn't really want to take the time to have your IT guy look at it or whatever, and somebody downloaded something off an email. Well, that's a port of entry, and it was unsecured. There wasn't a guard at the front gate, right?
Yep.
And they just walked right in.
Yep.
So yeah, that can happen.
Good. All right. So to summarize, really what cyber liability insurance is about risk. And like we talked about in the beginning of this video, you can accept that risk, you can mitigate that risk, and you can transfer that risk.
Yes.
And cyber liability lets you take some of that risk and transfer it so it's not on your shoulders.
Right.
Anything else you'd add to that?
That you are paying a relatively small amount annually for a large amount in the event of a claim. So,
well, yeah. You mentioned an incident response team.
Right.
You're going to want that team.
Right.
I promise.
You're going to want that employee training. You're going to want that.
Those attorneys are expensitive. They charge for every email,
everything.
Every correspondence.
Especially when there's an insurance company involved.
So exactly. They know they keep getting paid more. Well, Melanie, I really appreciate you coming on today. For anyone that is interested in working with you, what's a good way that they can reach you?
Okay, yeah. So my email is mclay@higginbotham.net. And directly you can reach me. My phone number is 719-867-4108. And so my company is Higginbotham, formerly known as Six and Geving Insurance. Now that we are part of Higginbotham, I have a lot more companies available to me. So it just means that I have more availability to help.
Thank you for watching this video. If you found it valuable, please like and maybe even consider sharing it with another business leader that can benefit from this information. Until next time, we'll see you in the next video.